I'm Elite, 29 years old, an interior designer working in New York. I used to believe that if I did everything right, life would treat me fairly in return. Until the day I was kicked out of the very home I had built with my own hands, not by a landlord, not by some real estate company, but by my own parents, the same people who once said, "This apartment is to help you start your independent life, more stable." I'm not telling this story to seek pity. And I'm not sharing it so someone will take my side. I'm telling it because I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way when you pour your heart into building a home, only to have it ripped away by the very people who were supposed to protect it. If you've ever been treated like an outsider in your own family, called selfish just because you dared to protect your boundaries, then you'll understand me. And if you're in the middle of a journey, trying not to lose yourself beneath the weight of expectations, obligations, and favoritism, then maybe this story will say out loud what you've been quietly carrying inside. Because this isn't just about an apartment, it's about value, about dignity, and about the moment when you finally stand up not to fight, but to walk away. In silence, but with your head held high. The moment I first stepped into that downtown apartment, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. It was a 2-bedroom unit on the 6th floor of a renovated historic building, right next to a small park where sparrows chirped in the morning and soft piano melodies drifted from a 3rd-floor window in the late afternoon. My parents had bought it as an investment, but said they wanted me to stay there for a while to watch the place, to keep it from feeling too empty. And so you won't have to rush into some overpriced rental. They offered me a symbolic rent far below market rate on the condition that I cover all living expenses, maintenance, and repairs, and that I kept the apartment in good shape. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to get entangled in the unclear strings of a family favor. But then I thought, at least it's an opportunity. A stepping stone toward building a truly independent life. A place where I could feel safe at least for the next few years. I moved in on a weekday. The apartment was nearly empty at the time, just old wooden floors, a decaying built-in wardrobe, and a flickering ceiling light that looked like it might crash down at any moment. But I didn't think it was ugly. I saw potential. I spent the entire weekend sketching interior plans, a bright-toned living room, an open kitchen that flowed into a Scandinavian-style dining area, a reading nook on the small balcony with warm lighting and built-in shelves. Every detail was carefully considered because it wasn't just a living space, it was a part of me. My first real home. A place where no one knocked unexpectedly, no one judged my meals, and no one tidied up while muttering, "No wonder you're not getting anywhere, living alone like this." I worked full-time during the week. In the evenings, I scoured Amazon, Wayfair, and Facebook Marketplace to find every piece. I found a secondhand burgundy armchair and restitched the torn fabric myself. I ordered a long oak table from a woodworking studio in Brooklyn and asked friends to help carry it up 6 flights of stairs. On weekends, I painted the walls layers of ivory white I had picked so carefully I tested them under 3 different lights to make sure they wouldn't turn gray in the sun. I picked out plants, hung linen curtains, and even bought sandalwood-scented candles so the apartment always felt warm and alive. I kept every receipt. Not to keep track, but to remind myself that every step I took, every little corner I created, was real and built by my own hands. 3 months later, the apartment had truly become a home. Friends who dropped by would always marvel at how warm and tasteful everything felt. I had learned to wake up with the sunlight, make coffee with my mini espresso machine, put on soft jazz, and work at the dining table with my laptop and a cup of mint tea by my side. It was the most peaceful time of my life. Not because everything was perfect, but because I felt I had the right to exist in that space, without asking for anyone's permission, without needing anyone's approval. I had begun to rewrite my own story, starting from the smallest things. The kitchen towel, the sofa cushions, the soft yellow light glowing in the corner of the living room. I had once believed that if I just lived kindly, worked hard, and stayed independent, things would eventually turn out fine. Until my mother called. I remember it clearly. It was a Wednesday night, around 8 p.m., and I was sitting on the kitchen floor, putting up a new faux brick decal on the wall. She started with, "Just calling to see how you're doing." Then, after some casual small talk, her voice dropped, like she was about to say something important. So, Juliet's been really stressed lately, just broke up with her boyfriend and lost her job. You know how sensitive she is. I was thinking maybe she could come stay with you for a while. Keep each other company, you know? Sister bonding. I stood up, wiped my hands with a tissue, my heart racing. You mean, Juliet is moving in? Where exactly? I asked. Well, the spare room, of course. You're not using it. Besides, this is the apartment your dad and I bought, right? She replied, casually, as if she were talking about changing the curtains. No request. No consideration. Just a statement. As if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if I were merely a guest in the place I lived. I didn't say another word. Just ended the call and stood in silence in the kitchen, the overhead lights still on, the wall half finished, the decals still drying. What I felt wasn't anger, it was emptiness. A strange hollowness crept into my chest. I realized no matter how hard I had tried, no matter how beautiful a home I had built in their eyes, I was still just a daughter. Nothing more. Without a say. Never the one who gets to be at the center. That was the first moment I truly understood I had been wrong to think I could find home within a family that never really saw me. But that was only the beginning. What came after that call was so much worse. I thought at the very least Juliet would call first. Or text. Or maybe even knock and smile, "Hey sis, I'm here." But no. She didn't say a word, didn't ask, didn't even try to be polite. I came home at 6 p.m. on Friday, after a long day working with clients, still holding a bag of Thai takeout only to find the apartment door wide open. Inside, the air reeked of cheap perfume and greasy fast food. All the lights were on, EDM music thumping from a Bluetooth speaker in the center of the living room. And there she was, Juliet, sitting cross-legged on my sofa, applying lipstick in front of the large mirror, surrounded by clothes, an open pizza box, and empty soda cans rolling on the floor. She looked up and, without so much as a greeting, said casually, "Perfect timing, sis. I just ordered more food. Let's eat together?" I froze for a few seconds. I looked at the cream-colored rug I had bought just 2 weeks ago now, stained with red wine. The walnut coffee table I waited 3 weeks for now, covered in food smudges and a chipped corner where something hard had slammed into it. Every piece I had chosen, cared for, cherished like a first child was now just background clutter for someone who had never paid a cent, never lifted a finger. I asked, "You moved in today? Why didn't you say anything to me first?" Juliet shrugged. "Mom told me to just come over. It's our family's place, what's there to be shy about? Plus, Mom said you weren't using the spare room anyway." I swallowed my anger. I didn't want to argue. Didn't want to escalate things. I began with a calm tone. "Juliet, I don't mind you being here, but we need to share this space respectfully. Please keep the music down, try to keep the place tidy, and..." I pointed at the wine stain on the rug. "If you spill something, you need to clean it up and let me know." She looked me up and down, then smirked. "You're so uptight. I mean, if it bothers you that much, you could always move out. This place was bought by Mom and Dad, remember? It's not really yours." I didn't respond. Just turned around, went into my room, locked the door, and took a deep breath. What followed was a series of small intrusions, repetitive, persistent, maddening. Juliet would wake up at 11, cook instant noodles, and leave the dishes in the sink. She used my vanity to try on makeup and never cleaned up after. At night, she'd FaceTime her ex, crying and yelling, and then, out of nowhere, host mini parties with her friends at midnight. I couldn't sleep. I had no quiet corner to work. And the most painful part wasn't the noise, it was the feeling of being pushed to the margins inside the very place I had once called home. I called my mom, hoping to hear a word of understanding. But instead of listening, she said, "She's going through a rough time. You're her sister, you should be supportive. Don't make it harder on her." I told her about the wine stain, about my ruined furniture. She simply said, "Furniture can be replaced, people can't." My dad was no different. Just put up with it a little. After all, the apartment was bought by us. They said it like a gentle reminder, but I heard it like a sentence. Everything I'd built there emotionally and physically was not mine. I was just a caretaker, a tenant with no lease, no say, and worse, no voice. I started keeping track of every expense: furniture, electronics, even the price of rugs, cushions, bedsheets, and scented candles. I photographed every receipt and stored them in a folder labeled Proof. I began taking daily photos of the apartment, documenting the state of it before and after Juliet turned it upside down. Then I bought a tiny camera, no bigger than a candy, and hid it discreetly in the corner of the living room. It only recorded when it detected movement, no sound, no flashing light. Not because I wanted to spy, but because I needed truth. I needed something objective in a family dynamic clouded by favoritism and emotion. Juliet had no idea. She went on like it was her personal apartment. She brought more stuff in: a blinding neon rug thrown in the middle of the floor, a few abstract art pieces nailed to the wall without asking, and a Bluetooth speaker she placed in the kitchen to blast music while she cooked. She didn't contribute a single cent to the electricity bill, water, or even toilet paper, but still had the nerve to complain. "Why is the kitchen so small? Why don't you have a dishwasher?" As if I were her maid, not the person who had paid and worked for everything she was now using for free. I started to withdraw. I felt suffocated. There were moments I wanted to scream, but I reminded myself, document everything. Stay calm. Because people like Juliet and people like my parents never believe words. They only believe paperwork, proof, tangible outcomes. And I would show them. Not with rage, but with the precision, detail, and patience of someone who has endured more than enough. Because this was no longer just about an apartment. This was about the right to truly exist in one's own life. And I was ready for what came next. That afternoon, the sun was gentle, a soft spring breeze rustling through the trees along the street as if everything in the world were calm and at peace. I sat across from my parents and Juliet at a cozy Italian restaurant on the corner, the same place where we once celebrated my 26th birthday. It seemed like a casual family lunch until my mother set down her glass and looked straight at me with a hesitant but clearly premeditated gaze. She began with what sounded like a harmless sentence. "Elite, your father and I have something we'd like to discuss with you." I put my fork down, silent. My father continued. "Actually, after some careful thought, we've decided it's time to rent out the apartment you're living in. The housing market is good right now. It would be a stable source of income for our retirement." I blinked, stared at him, not fully understanding. "You mean, what exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. My mother smiled faintly, as if she were talking about changing the curtains. "We've found some long-term tenants, foreigners. They're willing to pay a good price. So, you should start preparing to move out in the next 2 weeks. You're good at saving. You can rent another place now, right?" I turned to look at Juliet sitting quietly, tapping on her phone like this entire conversation didn't involve her at all. I asked, "What about Juliet?" My father shrugged. "She's not quite settled yet. Probably just needs to stay a bit longer. We'll figure things out once the lease is signed." My whole body froze. I let out a small, bitter laugh, but no one noticed. I looked around the restaurant, still buzzed with voices. The soft lighting still cast a warm glow over the table, but inside me, something cracked. I didn't argue, didn't ask why, didn't express my feelings. I just stayed quiet, swallowed hard, picked up a forkful of cold lasagna, chewed, and tasted nothing. They looked at me as if they'd just delivered a kind, reasonable, and well-thought-out announcement, as if there was nothing wrong. To them, I was simply a guest whose time in the discounted suite had expired. And Juliet, the sister who never spent a dime, never washed a dish, got to stay, as if she mattered more. That evening, I went home, opened the door to the apartment that had once been my sanctuary but now felt like a chaotic space filled with careless laughter and the overpowering perfume of Juliet. I walked straight into my room, locked the door, and sat in the dark. No light, no music. Just me, listening to my heartbeat and the echoes of laughter from the living room. That's when I knew with painful clarity. I had never truly been the owner here. I was only ever a guest. Not just in this apartment, but in my own family. That night, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new spreadsheet. I titled it, Exit Plan. The first line was a list of every item I had purchased. Sofa, $1,200, dining table, $680, rug, $340, floor lamp, $210, bookshelf, $190, wall art, $85. I kept going, recalling every item, pulling up receipts from my email, updating purchase dates and sources. I checked my proof folder full of photos, videos, and receipts. I carefully organized everything by room, by area, by value. Not to demand money back, but to reclaim myself. The next morning, I requested a week off work. I gave no reason. I called a moving company I had worked with during my freelance days and booked them for the following Friday. I began packing up things no one would notice. Plates, kitchenware, picture frames, blankets, candles, small decor. I bought cardboard boxes, markers, tape, and colored labels. I tagged each item. Fridge, mine. Television stand, mine. Bedside lamp, mine. I wasn't writing to show off, I was writing so that when the day came, no one could stop me. Because everything would be documented. I didn't say a word to Juliet. She went on living as usual, blasting music, inviting friends over, trying on dresses in the middle of the living room. One day, she even asked, "Are you thinking of getting a new sofa? This one's kinda worn out." I just smiled, saying nothing. I let her live in the illusion that the apartment was hers. I let her and my parents stay comfortable inside the dream they had spun for themselves, that they had the right to push me out and still keep everything I had created. But they forgot one thing. I was no longer the timid daughter who once lowered her head and asked permission just to leave the house. I had been through too much loss to still believe that silence means consent. And this time, I would walk away, but not empty-handed. On the final night before moving out, I brewed a cup of hot tea and sat in the middle of the now empty living room where I had just taken down the floor lamp and packed up the framed art. I looked around. The golden kitchen light glowed softly. The sofa was gone. The dining table was gone. All that remained was the wide open floor and faint circles left by the table legs. I felt lighter. As if every item I took with me was also a piece of dignity I had reclaimed. And this time, no one could take it away from me. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister. No one. Friday morning brought a light drizzle. The raindrops tapped gently against the window, like a soft drumroll ushering in my quiet, calculated departure. I woke up early, made myself a coffee, tied my hair into a neat bun, put on my long coat, and prepared for a long day. At exactly 9 a.m., a white moving truck pulled up in front of the building. Two men got out, pushing plastic bins, dollies, and padded blankets for wrapping furniture. I nodded in greeting, then opened the apartment door, still fully furnished, still looking like a perfectly lived-in home. But I knew that in just a few hours, it would return to its original state, a hollow, soulless shell. I handed them the floor plan I'd drawn of the items to move. Brown fabric sofa, west side of the living room. Samsung fridge, kitchen corner, short pile white rug under the dining table. 65-inch LG television mounted living room, solid oak dining table, and 4 woven chairs center of the room. Every item had a label. Elite, owner, along with a printed copy of the receipt, clearly showing the purchase date and delivery address. Within 3 hours, the apartment emptied out, piece by piece. The soft scraping of chair legs, the rustle of packing wrap, the click of cabinet doors opening and closing, it all sounded like a melancholy farewell song. I stood on the hardwood floor, watching the items I had once cherished being neatly stacked onto the truck. I didn't feel sad, I felt at peace. As if, finally, I had gathered every piece of self-worth that had been stripped from me over the past months. By 1 p.m., When everything was gone, I stood in the apartment surrounded by faint marks where table legs had once been, the dusty outline of a sofa, and the bare wall where my artwork had hung. I walked through each room, looked around, double-checked everything. There was nothing left to regret. Nothing left to cling to. I locked the door, exhaled softly, then slipped the key into an envelope, sealed it, wrote Juliet's name on the front, and dropped it into the mailbox by the door. Around 4 p.m., I got a message from an unknown number. "What the hell did you just do?" I didn't reply. I knew Juliet had come home. And I could clearly picture her face as she opened the door and stepped into an empty apartment, no chair to sit on, no lamp to switch on, no mirror to check her makeup, no kitchen to cook in. Everything that once gave the place a sense of home had disappeared along with the only person who ever treated it like one. But I didn't stop there. That very night, I reopened my email and drafted a formal letter to the building management, and the tenants association people I knew were already overwhelmed with complaints from surrounding residents about unusual noise and strange odors. I attached video clips from my security camera. Juliet blasting music at midnight, dragging speakers into the hallway to dance, vaping right in front of Unit 301 beneath a no smoking sign as big as a pizza tray. I didn't say much. Just a short paragraph. "I am submitting evidence of disruptive behavior and violations of building policies at Unit X06. I kindly request that the board review and handle the matter in accordance with building regulations." 3 days later, I received a reply from management. "We have reviewed the information and issued an official warning to the occupant of Unit X06. Thank you for your cooperation." I read the message, took a slow sip of tea, and marked the email complete. I'm on. A few hours later, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice sharp with anger. "Elite, what the hell was that? You humiliated Juliet. You made us look bad in front of the entire building. What were you thinking? After everything we've done for you." Then came a string of texts from my father. "You're so ungrateful. We were only trying to do what's best for both of you. Why must you always make things so complicated?" And from Juliet, "You're petty. You made them cancel the rental deal. Now what? Who's going to fix this?" I read them all. Then powered off my phone. The rental contract they had so confidently planned was now unworkable. The management board refused to approve it because the current resident Juliet had received an official warning. The apartment, though now empty, carried the stigma of being problematic. Any prospective renter who checked the internal database would see the red flag. And when they came to view the place, they would find nothing but a cold, hollow space, no chairs, no lights, nothing but emptiness. I imagined my mother standing in the middle of that apartment, phone in hand, trying to call me, still attempting a soft tone to reel me back in. "Elite, sweetheart, maybe you can come back, or just leave a few pieces of furniture?" But it was too late. There would be no more bargaining. No piece of furniture was being left for the family. Because that family had chosen to push me out, rather than love me the right way. I didn't respond to anyone. I didn't need to explain. I didn't owe an apology. I didn't need to hear one more sentence that began with, "But Juliet is just." I stayed silent. And that was how I ended it. A revenge not of screaming, not of fury, but of precision, documentation, and the quiet patience of someone who had endured too much for too long. They could call me ungrateful, cold, disrespectful, but only I knew I had done what needed to be done. Not to get even, but to put an end to a cycle where sacrifice was expected, silence was exploited, and love was defined by obedience. I walked away and took everything with me, including my dignity. And no one could take that back. 2 weeks after I moved out, a brown envelope bearing the seal of the Brooklyn District Court arrived at my new address. Inside was a lawsuit filed by my own parents, its contents clear. Request for the return of unlawfully taken property. Attached was a nearly 3-page list of furniture, electronics, and household items. All claimed to be family property. I held the document in my hand, my eyes fixed on the line that read, Defendant, Elite Greenway, and I didn't know whether to laugh or grieve. After everything, they never called to ask why. Never once tried to understand what I had taken. Never acknowledged that they were the ones who told me to handle all the decorating. They didn't remember the receipts I had sent via email, or the messages from my mother saying, "Thank you for buying all these things," when I first moved in. The only thing they remembered was how to reclaim the property, and suddenly, in their eyes, I became a thief. I took a deep breath, folded the documents, and called my lawyer, Mr. Farrow, the same man who had helped me with a design copyright dispute a few years ago. I explained the situation in full and sent him the folder I had been compiling over the months I lived with Juliet. Photos of each item before and after installation, receipts, unboxing videos, even voice recordings where my parents had said, "Buy whatever you want. If you ever move out, you can take your things with you." On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with a strange calm. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because I knew that this time, I wasn't alone. I had the truth. And I had proof. My parents' lawyer, a gray-haired man in gold-rimmed glasses, opened with emotional language. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs were betrayed by their own daughter. Trusting her, they let her stay temporarily in their apartment, only to have her strip it bare and abandon it, causing significant losses." I remained silent, unfazed. My attorney simply smiled, rose to his feet, and began. He placed a thick folder on the table and opened a presentation. Item by item from the sofa to the espresso machine each had a receipt in my name, accompanied by photos of the purchase location, delivery dates, and even pictures of me assembling them. He followed with a detailed cost breakdown, totaling over $13,000. Then Mr. Farrow quoted Section 71B of the New York Civil Code. Property purchased with personal funds, with no record of transfer or gift to a third party, is presumed to belong to the purchaser. He pointed to my credit card statements and stated clearly, "My client did not steal anyone's property, she merely took what was hers." Finally, he played an audio recording. My mother's voice from last year. "Go ahead and buy what you need, sweetheart. Treat it like your home for the long term, as long as it looks nice." Then my father's voice followed. "If you move out later, just take what you bought, it's no problem." The courtroom fell silent for several seconds after the recording ended. My parents sat across from me, their faces frozen in silence. Juliet wasn't there, perhaps too busy grappling with a different kind of shame. The judge, a woman in her early 50s, stern and composed, looked at both sides before issuing her verdict. Based on the presented evidence and consistent testimony, the court finds that the defendant, Miss Elite Greenway, did not commit theft. The listed items are recognized as her personal property. The plaintiff's claim is hereby dismissed. Furthermore, the plaintiffs are ordered to compensate the defendant in the amount of $9,300 for moving costs, emotional distress, and legal fees incurred due to false accusations. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, thanked my lawyer, gathered my files, and walked out of that courtroom with a lightness I had never known. As if, after years of being told to stay in line, I had finally had the chance to affirm my right to exist on my own terms. Without validation, without anyone's permission. 3 days after the trial, I received a flood of messages. My mother wrote, "You won. Are you satisfied now? Was it worth doing this to your own parents?" My father's tone was colder. "You've brought shame to this family. I hope you're proud of yourself." Juliet, as always, deflected blame. "Because of you, the apartment couldn't be rented. Now it has to be sold at a loss. Happy now?" I read every message. I didn't reply. But this time, I didn't feel hurt. I just felt tired. Like closing the cover on an old, worn-out book that never had a proper ending, no matter how many times you tried to fold the pages back into place. The compensation arrived in my bank account the following week. $9,300, not a life-changing sum. But it was proof that sometimes, justice sides with the quiet one. I used a small portion of it to buy a new armchair, which I placed in the corner of the balcony in my small apartment. The rest I set aside, as a reminder, always keep your receipts. Not because you don't trust others, but because sometimes it's your own family who will be the first to doubt you. Since that day, I've never returned to the old building. Not out of fear, but because there's nothing left for me to reclaim there. Family, if it's not a place where you can be yourself, is nothing more than an empty label. And I had finally learned how to walk away from that label. No hatred, no clinging. Just the strength to know that the only approval you need is your own. A week after the trial, just when things seemed to have settled, I received a text from my mother at 7 a.m. "Why did you have to take it this far?" The message flashed across my phone screen like a slap to the heart of someone who had just been sued by their own parents. I stared at it for a long time, unsure of what I was feeling. Not anger, not bitterness. Not even the pain I thought I would feel. Just a dull, spreading fatigue like her question didn't just deny the injustice I endured, but blamed me again this time, for daring to respond, for daring to stand up, for daring not to stay silent. Later that afternoon, Juliet messaged too. A long, rambling text. Full of rhetorical questions. Why couldn't you just compromise? Why did you have to take everything? Why couldn't you just stay quiet, live together like a real family? And then she ended with, "Because of you, they had to sell the apartment for less than they planned. Because of you, everything fell apart. Hope you're happy." I sat in my new apartment, the late afternoon sunlight casting a soft golden stripe across the floor through the small window. In the quiet, there was only the low hum of the AC and the faint scent of lavender from the candle, a small luxury I gifted myself after months of suffocating in someone else's space. I looked at the phone one last time, then quietly turned it off. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had already said too much in the past, in my actions, in the way I chose silence when I was pushed out of what I built, in how I kept every receipt, every piece of proof, every detail no one cared to ask about, and now, I didn't need to say another word. I opened my contact list, found the names, Mom, then Dad, then Juliet. I blocked them all. Not out of spite, but to free myself from a cycle where love was confused with control, where being a child was equated with unquestioned obedience. I had lived my entire life in fear that if I said no, if I asked for fairness, if I refused to sacrifice quietly, I would be called ungrateful, disrespectful, selfish. But the truth is, I was never the one they chose to protect. I was never the one they thought was worth standing up for. There was a time, back in high school, when my mother said something during one of our arguments about Juliet. She looked at me and said, "She's more fragile than you. You're the older sister, you should know how to give in." And from that moment on, for years, every time Juliet made a mistake, that line became a shield, an excuse, a blanket exemption from responsibility. Meanwhile, I, the one who was always on time, always neat, always working hard, was simply labeled the strong one, which meant I could afford to endure a little more. But what they forgot is this: even the strongest people have limits. After the trial, I heard my parents were trying to sell the apartment. At first, they listed it at a high price, hoping to make a profit. But 3 weeks passed, and no one came to view it. The building management had posted an internal warning. This unit has a history of disruptive tenant behavior. Buyers hesitated, the market dipped. Eventually, they had to slash the price by over 20% just to get an offer. And when it came time to close the deal, the buyers still demanded that the owners cover the cost of interior repairs because the apartment was described as completely empty and in need of full renovation. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I just felt hollow. Because the truth is, this so-called family never really saw me as a part of it. They only acknowledged me when they needed someone to play the role of the model daughter, someone to clean up after Juliet, someone to keep the apartment in pristine condition so it could be rented out later for profit. But when I needed someone to check in, to offer respect, to involve me in a decision, no one was there. I started writing in a journal again. Every night, after turning off the lights, I'd write a short entry. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic. Some nights it was just a sentence. I had lunch alone today, and it felt peaceful. Other nights, I bought a new painting and hung it above the bed. It makes me smile every morning. I didn't write for anyone else to read. I wrote to remind myself that I was still here, intact, after everything. You know, the collapse of a family doesn't always come from one catastrophic blow. Sometimes, it's just the accumulation of tiny fractures. A blame, shifting text, a meal eaten without an apology, a decision made without you, a finger pointed your way when things go wrong. And when those moments stack high enough, you stop and ask yourself, when did this stop feeling like home? And if the answer is, a long time ago, then maybe you already know what to do. Not because you don't love them, but because you've started to learn how to love yourself and you know that staying will only keep hurting you. I used to think that to be loved, I had to be good. I had to yield. I had to always consider everyone else. I used to believe that if I just tried hard enough, stayed quiet enough, endured long enough, then one day, someone would finally see me, notice what I had silently done for them, and say the one sentence I had always longed to hear. Thank you for being here. But that day never came. Instead, I was labeled ungrateful for daring to keep what was mine, called difficult for refusing to sacrifice again, and pushed away because I no longer had the strength to carry the weight. Now, as I sit and write my story in this small apartment, surrounded by the warm light and silence I chose, I understand something more clearly than ever before. I don't owe anyone my silence. I don't owe anyone an apology for protecting my boundaries. I don't owe anyone the comfort of going unchallenged when they act unjustly. I'm no longer trying to be the good daughter in anyone's eyes. I just want to be someone true to myself and peaceful enough to keep going. Because you know what? Real love doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't demand that you endure pain in order to be seen. It doesn't ask you to give up who you are just to be allowed to stay in a relationship. The people who truly love you won't turn your silence into something they can take for granted, won't use your kindness as an excuse to take advantage, won't twist the meaning of family into a reason to silence your voice. If you've made it this far, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you've been called selfish just for setting boundaries. Maybe you've been labeled difficult simply because you refuse to suffer in silence any longer. Maybe you've walked away from a dinner table with your throat tight while everyone smiled at someone else and no one thought to ask if you were okay. I want you to know you are not alone. I see you. I understand you. And more than anything, I want you to remember this. You are not ungrateful for choosing yourself. You are not cold for walking away when every door is slammed shut. You are not cruel for holding on to what you built with your own hands. You are simply growing up in the most honest way possible. By being truthful about how you feel, and by no longer asking for permission to be who you are. Let my story be a message to you, the one who's been told they're too much, the one who's wondered if they were wrong for not letting it slide one more time. You are not wrong. You are just learning how to love yourself the right way. And if you've ever been forced to sacrifice without being seen, if you've ever been told to stay silent for the sake of peace in a family that never really listened, leave just one line under this video. I don't owe anyone my silence. Because at some point, you'll realize, living in truth with yourself is the most powerful, quiet victory there is. And I believe you deserve that. Starting today. No permission needed, no forgiveness required. Just you, choosing you.